Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The sun in Aduane never rose gently. It banged its chest against the roofs and startled children out of sleep like a mother scolding her last born. Mean had long stopped waiting for daybreak to dictate his movements. He was always the first to rise, sometimes before the birds found their voices, before the firewood smoke curled through the neighbor's zinc, before hope remembered where it left its slippers. At 15, he didn't walk through life like a boy. He staggered under the weight of a role that life stuffed into his hands too early. His parents, if they could still be called that, had long grown numb to the call of responsibility. Their home wasn't a home. It was a holding space where voices were louder than actions, and hunger was a frequent visitor that no one dared ask to leave. Mean's younger siblings, Laura and Ibuka, depended on him more than they understood. He fetched water before dawn, hawked boiled eggs in the scorching sun, and returned with sore feet and a face that forgot what laughter tasted like. Nobody told him thank you. But deep in his chest, beyond where pain hides and pride pretends, he made a vow to never let those two suffer as he did, not while he still had breath and two legs that could bend without snapping. Mean's days blurred into each other, like the smudges of charcoal on the edge of his trousers after every firewood sale. It wasn't just the poverty, it was the noise of constant disappointment, the emptiness that echoed through the silence of a home where joy had packed its bags. His father, Oseji, was a shadow who stumbled in at odd hours, smelling of borokutu and regret. Their mother, Adara, had grown cold not from the harm of life, but from the decision to stop caring. Her eyes carried that faraway look women wore when they had long divorced their own hearts. When Mean tried to talk to her, she blinked as if trying to remember who he was. But what pierced deeper than rejection was when his own dreams began to dissolve. School became a luxury. He would watch classmates in clean uniforms, laughing past him on the road. Sometimes he followed them with his eyes and prayed under his breath, "Lord, please don't let my life end with only this kind of beginning." A psalmist once said, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit," Psalm 34, verse 18. And though Mean didn't always feel the nearness, he clung to the verse like a nail to old wood, desperate to stay intact. There came a night when the hunger was so loud it sounded like drumming inside his stomach. He had returned with a little money after assisting an old carpenter with heavy planks. When he entered the room they all shared, he tucked the small naira notes beneath his wrapper, whispering plans to himself. He would use part of it to buy beans and Gary, keep the rest for Lara's school notebook. But dawn had its own story. The money was gone. His heart pounded like someone was inside his chest, beating a drum with no rhythm. At first he thought maybe he misplaced it, but a glance at Ibuka's guilty eyes told him otherwise. Mean said nothing. Not that day. Not even when Lara hinted she had seen Ibuka sneaking around the night before. Silence was his sword. He was tired, not just of poverty, but of always having to be the one who forgave without being asked, who understood without being explained to. That day, he went outside, sat under the mango tree with cracked bark, and wept quietly. His tears didn't come with sound. They came like soldiers, marching with purpose, carving a silent war across his cheeks. The world didn't pause to pity him. Nobody even noticed. But he made another vow one that night. He said, "If I don't find a way out of this pit, I will raise children who'll dig me deeper." Years passed with the stealth of a thief. Mean grew taller, darker, and stronger, but not colder. That part of him remained stubborn, holding tight to the warmth of responsibility. He worked odd jobs, doing whatever came his way. When he got the chance to work at a factory in Baraku, a city far enough from Aduane to forget the smell of that pain-soaked house, he didn't tell anyone until the bus ticket was in his hand. The night before he left, Laura was asleep with her arm draped around Ibuka, both unaware that the glue of their little world was about to melt. Mean watched them like a father saying goodbye to a life he didn't want but couldn't abandon easily. He thought about waking them, hugging them, explaining himself. But explanations didn't buy soap. They didn't fill stomachs or pay rent. So he picked up his nylon bag, containing 2 shirts, 1 trouser, and a photograph of them all taken years ago at a neighbor's wedding, and he stepped into the night. The stars that evening blinked slowly, like reluctant witnesses. As he boarded the rickety bus to Bariku, he whispered, "Lord, if you truly order the steps of the righteous, please don't let this road twist into another form of suffering." His back ached from the wooden seat, but his heart burned with a strange mix of fear and freedom. For the first time, he was moving not just with the weight of others, but with the hope of someday remembering who he could have been, before duty bent him into a version of himself he no longer recognized. Bariku was not what Mean imagined. It wasn't paved with promise or lined with gold. It was a city whose lungs breathed noise and whose bones were buried beneath the weight of people chasing bread with desperation in their eyes. The air reeked of ambition and old motor oil, and the streetlights blinked like tired men who had forgotten how to hope. Mean arrived at night, wearing his best shirt, the blue one with 2 missing buttons, and clinging to a plastic bag that held the sum total of his life. He had nowhere to go, no one to call. A former classmate, F, had promised to arrange something for him if he came. That something turned out to be a mattress in the corner of a room already filled with 3 other men. But Mean didn't complain. He had lived through worse. That first week, he hustled from one factory gate to another, carrying his CV like a begging bowl. Doors closed, promises delayed, and faces frowned. But one morning, after standing in line for 4 hours beneath a sun that had no mercy, a supervisor at Oko Steelworks glanced at his slim frame and said, "You strong." Mene nodded. "Adid, Firer, Uizvifi, Luis Bais Ninid, Maisal, Muscle, Mene nodded. Balis, O Wolflita Ulvioises, Benadid, Usk Kudrislish. Ommerlof bode video. Many bezvier nazapes was bais birastekina mestius. Masti over the soto, and menenadefir. Man the hotel will speechless. O little cello, formalof no ferespes. Be uzetta lechoft yelnes, dela of betheshu. Be is medical backfast, or would you not say? That was his interview. That day, with aching muscles and a silent shout in his chest, he earned his first city wage. It wasn't much, but it was his, and he knew what to do with it before he even touched it. His first thought was of home, of Lara's textbooks, Buka's shoes, and the sigh that would escape his mother's lips when the money arrived. At first, sending money home felt like a victory. It gave him a reason to wake up at 4 a.m. and sleep on an empty stomach. He would gather his small savings, visit the transfer shop, and scribble a note. Tell Lara to be careful with this one. It's all I can spare. The replies from home were sweet at first. God will bless you, Mean. You are the father we never had. You are our pillar. But soon the messages grew teeth. This money is not enough. You forgot Abuka's exam fees. We've not eaten since yesterday. It was like pouring water into a basket. No matter how much he sent, there was always a whole leaking need back into his ears. Mean tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to love and responsibility. But one night, when he chose to buy pain relief tablets instead of sending airtime, Laura's voice on the phone cracked like broken glass. "You've changed," she hissed. "Don't forget it's us you're working for." Mean hung up that night with his back against the wall, staring at the stained ceiling of the crowded room. He didn't recognize who he was becoming. Neither did he know who he was trying to be. The Bible said, "A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children," Proverbs 13, verse 22. But no verse said what a man should do when his inheritance was just his sweat and a dream too small to split. Over time, he noticed how his life had quietly slipped through the cracks of his own hands. He hadn't bought himself anything new in over a year. The same phone, the same shoes, the same shirt with a careful patch beneath the collar. His coworkers would joke, "Oga mean, you day save for mansion a be?" And he would force a smile that never reached his eyes. But the truth was heavier than any joke. Mean was caught in a loop, a human ATM for a family that no longer saw him as a brother, but as a bridge to cross over their own problems. He missed birthdays. He missed funerals. He missed home. But worst of all, he missed himself. On a cold Sunday morning, he sat by a roadside mechanic shop, his salary tucked into his sock, waiting for the money transfer kiosk to open. A boy passed by selling Puff Puff, and for a brief moment Mean reached for his wallet, then stopped. That 10 naira, he reminded himself, might make the difference in Lara's transport fare. He sat back, stomach growling, eyes hollow. What kind of life was this? Was this what God meant when he said, "Carry each other's burdens"? Galatians 6 verse 2? Was he supposed to die so others could breathe? It was during that season, when loneliness began to walk beside him like a shadow with sharp elbows, that he met her. Anita was nothing like the women he passed daily on his way to work. She didn't wear her beauty like makeup or her confidence like perfume. She was subtle, precise, and carried herself like someone who knew what tomorrow looked like, even if today wasn't promising. They met outside the bakery near his worksite. She had come to fix a delivery error. He had come to buy day-old bread at a discount. Their eyes met for a second too long, and she offered a small smile, the kind that didn't ask for attention but gave it anyway. Over the next few weeks, they exchanged brief greetings. She noticed he never looked rushed, yet always seemed tired. He noticed her eyes were observant, not intrusive. When they finally spoke for real, it was because she asked, "You always look like you're solving a problem nobody sees." He chuckled, a sound he hadn't made in months. "Maybe I am," he replied. What he didn't know then was that Anita wasn't just another passerby. She was a chapter waiting to be read, a mirror waiting to show him what he had long forgotten, that a man is more than the money he sends home, and sometimes being the savior of others means losing the fight for your own soul. There are some people who don't knock loudly when they enter your life. They walk in with a whisper and rearrange the furniture of your soul before you even notice. That was Anita. She didn't speak in long sentences or wear her opinions like a badge, but when she looked at you, you felt seen, and that was more disarming than any flirtation. She and Mean began to share moments, 5-minute chats outside the bakery, quiet walks under the evening sky, where the air smelled like hot bread, and restless dreams. She asked questions that didn't sound like interrogation, and he found himself answering in ways that surprised him. One day, under the shade of a jacaranda tree near the main road, she asked softly, "Mean, when was the last time you planned something for yourself?" He laughed, but the sound rang hollow. "People like me don't plan," he said. "We react. Planning is for people who can afford mistakes." Anita tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "That's a lie poor people tell themselves," she replied gently. "It's not money that makes plans, it's vision." That sentence clung to him for days like wet cloth. It annoyed him at first. Who was she to speak so boldly? But in the quiet recesses of his spirit, the truth echoed. He couldn't remember the last time he thought about himself in the future. He existed in the now, sprinting through fire to put out everyone else's flame. Anita's presence grew like a soft vine around the jagged stones of Mean's life. She began asking him about numbers, his monthly earnings, his expenses, what he sent to his siblings. At first, he was defensive. It felt like exposure, like she was unzipping the very spine of his existence. But she never shamed him. Instead, she introduced him to a small black ledger, the kind that market women used to keep track of sales. "Write it down," she told him. "Don't guess." No. Slowly, he began tracking his life. For the first time, he saw what he already suspected but had never confirmed. Nearly 80% of his income was leaving his hands before he could even smell its worth. Rent was late, meals were skipped, and his phone hung on life support, yet his siblings expected him to send money as if manna still fell. He asked Anita one night, "Am I wicked if I stop giving?" She looked at him for a long moment and replied, "No, you become wicked when you stop giving to yourself." That sentence split him open. Like the words in Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1. Maybe it was time for a new season. One where responsibility didn't mean martyrdom. One where being a brother didn't mean being broken. The first time he said no to Laura, his hands trembled like a leaf caught in harmattan wind. She had called to say she needed $25,000 for Abuka's business plan. Mean looked at his ledger. He didn't even have $5,000 left. He told her, gently, that he couldn't send anything until next month. The silence on the line was thick enough to chew. Then came her voice, sharp and cold. "So it's this your Anita that is now controlling you, ABA?" He froze. He hadn't told her about Anita. How did she know? "You've changed," she snapped. "You're not our brother anymore. You're just another selfish man chasing his own comfort." She hung up before he could respond. The words clung to his chest like leeches. All his years of sacrifice reduced to bitterness the moment he dared to choose himself. For days, he carried the weight of her words like bricks tied to his ankles. But Anita didn't let him drown in guilt. "Love without boundaries is not love," she said. "It's bondage. And even God gives us free will." That night, he didn't sleep much. He sat on the edge of his bed, the ledger open beside him, and whispered a prayer that wasn't long or loud. "Lord, teach me how to be good, without losing myself in the process." Weeks passed. The calls from home didn't stop, but Mean no longer jumped at every ring like a man on a leash. He began saving small amounts. Anita introduced him to someone who ran a cooperative for young men who wanted to grow business ideas. They met every Thursday evening behind the local church, under a mango tree with crooked roots and stories soaked into its bark. At first, Mean just listened. Then he spoke. Then he dared to dream. He wrote out a plan for a small logistics service, bikes that could deliver within Bariku at lower rates. Anita helped him polish it. For the first time in years, Mean saw a version of himself not defined by lack or obligation. He even began discussing his siblings' dependency with a new lens. "What if I set them up with something that forces them to stand?" he asked Anita one evening. She didn't smile, didn't nod. She said something better. "Now you're thinking like a builder. Not just a brick." The next Sunday, he sent Laura and Ibuka messages. "No money. Just words. I want to help you start something that will grow. But I won't keep feeding what won't change. We'll talk soon." He hit send, then turned off his phone. The sky outside wept lightly, and for the first time, Mean let it rain without feeling like he had to fix it. Laura always had a sharp tongue, but now it carried a dagger. After Mean's message, the one offering partnership instead of handouts, her silence turned into rage soaked in sarcasm. She stopped replying to his messages, except for the occasional wow or noted. But it didn't stop there. Whispers started in the family circle. Cousins he hadn't spoken to in years suddenly texted him things like, "We heard you don't change, oh, money don't blind your eyes." His uncle, the one who used to say Mean is the only child with sense, now called him late one evening and said, "You're not too big to remember where you came from, boy. Don't let one city girl confuse you." Mean was speechless. It was as if the roots of obligation had grown mouths and began gnawing at his peace. Anita noticed something was off. "They've started turning on you, haven't they?" she asked while they sat at a roadside buka. He stirred his watery beans absent-mindedly. "They think it's you," he said. "They think you've put something in my head." Anita sighed and leaned back. "I didn't put anything in your head, Mean. I just removed the cotton wool they stuffed in your ears for years." Her voice was gentle, but there was fire behind it. Mean chuckled, but the laughter scratched his throat. How did love become something that needed defending? He wasn't choosing between them and her. He was choosing between sinking and learning to swim. Laura's bitterness didn't just remain a whisper behind closed phones. It became a scream. One morning, Mean opened Facebook to find a post from her that read, "Some people only remember you exist when they need to prove how generous they are. God sees it all." The comments were a marketplace of insults, some indirect, others brazen. "Is this not Mean, sister?" "You mean that boy in Bariku?" "Nawa, oh, so he's now forming celebrity?" His heart thudded. Not because the world turned on him. He had braved worse storms, but because the people he bled for were now painting him with the same brush used on strangers who never tried. That evening, he stood before a mirror and stared at the face staring back. The scar above his left eyebrow from when he fell chasing Laura in the rain as a boy. The tiredness in his eyes. The lines forming too early for someone in his early 30s. He placed his hand on the mirror, as if trying to reach through. "When did I become the villain in their story?" he muttered. There was no answer, only silence, thick like palm oil and just as hard to wash off. That night, Anita didn't offer advice. She held his hand and simply said, "Let them talk. If they knew what it cost you to become this version of you, they would fall on their knees." Mean began implementing his plan anyway. If the noise wouldn't stop, then he'd drown it out with action. He approached a friend who had a small poultry business and proposed helping Ebuka get trained. The friend agreed. He sent the proposal to Ebuka along with a voice note explaining everything. The reply came 2 days later. "So you can send voice note now, but can't send small money when person day need am? Not training go feed me?" Mean didn't reply. His silence was no longer weakness, it was preservation. He pitched another business idea to Laura, a mobile fashion stall that could cater to Bariku's streetwear scene, with options to sell online eventually. Her response was short. "I didn't ask for your ideas. I asked for support." Support. That word burned. What had he been doing all these years? What had all the sleepless nights, the empty plates, the cracked soles of his slippers meant to them? Was love now measured only in currency? He opened his Bible that night to Proverbs 17 verse 2. "A wise servant will rule over a disgraceful son and will share the inheritance as one of the brothers." He paused, closed the book, and whispered, "Lord, let me not become the disgrace just because I chose wisdom." Anita came over with jollof rice and plantain, and they ate in silence. Peace was no longer a loud thing. It was the absence of noise. But peace doesn't stay long when you're healing. It's like a house without a fence, easy for drama to stroll in uninvited. One afternoon, Mean was working when Laura showed up unannounced at his job. She wore a wrapper tied carelessly and a frown carved into her forehead. "So this is the life you're living?" she said, loud enough for others to hear. "You day form big man here, while your own family day chopstone?" His co-workers turned their heads slowly. Mean froze. The humiliation wasn't just public, it was surgical. He tried to lead her away quietly, but she pushed his hand off. "No, touch me. I'm not one of your projects," she spat. Anita happened to arrive at that very moment, holding a brown envelope with bank documents for the cooperative. She stood still, eyes scanning the scene. Laura turned to her like a hawk spotting prey. "Nah, you're the one whispering poison into his ears, Abi? Congratulations. You've turned a good man into an ATM with no pin." Mean stepped between them, face pale. "Enough," he said. "This is not the way." But the damage was done. By the end of the day, the whole compound knew. And when night came, it brought with it the kind of silence that follows a funeral, except this time it wasn't a body that was buried. It was the last thread of the old life Mean thought he could still patch together. Mean didn't return home that night. He sat outside the compound, legs stretched before him, back pressed against a rusted water drum. The sky blinked with distant stars, each one seeming to ask a question he couldn't answer. The street was asleep, but his mind was wide awake, wider than it had ever been. Everything in him ached, but it wasn't from physical labor. It was the kind of pain that no balm could heal. That afternoon scene with Laura played again and again like a broken record. The look in her eyes wasn't just anger, it was betrayal. But how could she feel betrayed by a brother who gave up his boyhood for her? Who silenced his hunger so she could eat? There are wounds that blood cannot fix, and Main realized, with the clarity of a man left alone at a party he organized, that some people don't love you. They love the version of you that stays broken for their benefit. Anita came outside eventually, barefoot, holding 2 cups of warm water. She sat beside him, neither of them speaking. The silence held them together like stitches. "Do you regret it?" she asked after a while. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he whispered something more vulnerable. "I feel like I buried my childhood in them, and now I have to bury them too." The funeral came sooner than expected, not of a person, but of history. Main's mother died a month after the confrontation. A short illness. They said she collapsed while boiling yam, never woke up. The news came through a neighbor, not family. Main stood in his small kitchen, the call still ringing in his ears, hands trembling as he turned off the gas. Death has a way of reducing everything to silence. His mother, despite all her flaws, all her distance, was the only woman who once pressed his head to her chest and called him her son. He traveled back to Aduin with Anita, a decision that tasted like defiance. The village hadn't changed much. The soil still coughed up dust when you walked, and the houses still leaned like drunkards, hoping to sober up. At the burial, the air was thick, not with grief, but with tension. People whispered. Eyes darted. Ibuka shook his hand loosely. Laura didn't even look his way. The funeral wasn't loud, yet everything screamed. Mean stood by the graveside, eyes dry, face still. When the dust hit the casket, it didn't sound like closure. It sounded like a door slamming shut. He didn't cry. He wanted to. But the tears didn't come. Anita touched his elbow. "Say something," she whispered. Mean stared into the red earth and murmured, "You never really knew me, Mama. But I hope heaven is kinder than life was." They returned to Bariku different, not just from grief, but from what grief stripped away. That burial had severed something final. The thread tying him to obligation, to blind loyalty, to saving people who didn't want to be saved, it snapped. Anita noticed the shift. Mean became quieter, but lighter. He took long walks alone. He began writing ideas in a small notebook. Plans. Dreams. Things that sounded silly before now took shape with color. His logistics dream picked momentum. The cooperative gave him a small grant to begin. He bought 2 bikes, hired 2 young boys from the area, and started making deliveries. The first month brought more losses than gains, but the second month whispered promise. One morning he stood at the bakery, arms folded, watching his boys load parcels with care. Anita stood beside him, sipping kunu. "You're building something," she said. He nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm tired of surviving," he replied. "I want to start living." She smiled too. "Then live, but live fully. Not with one hand still holding the past." He exhaled, not like a man sighing, but like one releasing ghosts. The scripture came to him, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing." Isaiah 43 verses 18 to 19. This, he thought, was the new thing, and he would not miss it for anything. The irony of healing is that sometimes it happens in your absence. While Mean built his business, Ibuka got a job at a car wash. A friend of his connected him to a local mechanic who needed help. He started earning small money. At first, it was just for recharge cards and bread, but eventually it stretched into paying his own rent. Laura, too, began sewing again. Her roommate posted one of her designs online, and someone ordered 2 skirts, then 5, then 10. Neither of them called Mean to share the news. But silence, this time, wasn't the enemy. It was evidence. The call stopped, not because love died, but because necessity did. And slowly, Mean's name was no longer murmured between clenched teeth or accused behind closed doors. They began to fend for themselves, not out of revenge, not to prove a point, but because, at last, the cord had been cut, and what they feared most, that his help would end, turned out to be their rebirth. One evening, while sorting delivery receipts, Mean's phone buzzed. It was Laura. One message, "Hope you're good. Just checking in." He stared at it for a long time, then replied, "I am." "I hope you are too." That was all. No bitterness. No blame. Just 2 people on separate journeys, finally learning how to walk without leaning. Peace doesn't announce itself like a parade. It seeps in quietly, like early morning light sliding under the curtain, soft enough to ignore, but warm enough to make you rise. For the first time in years, Mean had mornings where he didn't wake up panicked by obligation. No phone calls demanding airtime. No accusations masked his concern. Just the chirping of birds, the smell of Anita's groundnut soup reheating in the kitchen, and the sound of his own breath, steady, unclenched. The logistics business was crawling, but it crawled forward, and in a land of setbacks, forward was a miracle. He trained the boys to show up early, to smile at customers, and to log every delivery like it was gold. He took pride in small wins, 1 parcel delivered on time, a returning customer, a 500 naira tip. He no longer tried to carry the world. He had learned, like a farmer during dry season, that sometimes the ground doesn't give just because you beg. You must water it, wait, and believe. Anita was always a few steps ahead, yet she never pushed him too far. She walked beside him, her hand steady, her heart quiet but bold. One night, as they stood on their balcony watching the sky wrap itself in velvet dusk, she placed her hand on his chest and said, "This is home now. Not a building. Not a title. You. Me. This piece." And Mean, whose life had once been a war, simply nodded. They didn't rush marriage. They didn't make it a spectacle either. It was a small gathering. 10 people, 1 dusty church hall, 1 stubborn generator that coughed throughout the vows. But it was real. Mean wore a simple suit Anita helped him pick. She wore a dress her aunt had sewn, cream lace with golden buttons that danced when the wind teased them. They didn't cry, but their eyes spoke. Promises formed in silence, and God bore witness. Mean's co-workers were there. The cooperative chairman came too, and even F, the one who gave him his first mattress in Bariku, showed up with an envelope that smelled like malt and sacrifice. Laura didn't attend. Abika sent a text the day before. Tell her congrats. Life Day move. Mean smiled when he read it, not because it was sentimental, but because it meant the door hadn't shut forever. After the wedding, Anita and Mean moved into a small 2-bedroom flat on the edge of Bariku. It wasn't luxury, but it was theirs. A wall to paint, a floor to sweep, a door to lock, and a future to build. They prayed every night before bed, not long prayers, but steady ones. Teach us to number our days, Lord, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Psalm 90, verse 12. In that room, love wasn't fireworks. It was dishes washed together. It was quiet apologies. It was holding hands in the middle of a rough week and saying, "I'm not going anywhere." Kama came like rainfall after a long drought, soft at first, then completely drenching. Their daughter was born 2 years into their marriage, her skin dark like her father's, her eyes sharp like her mother's. Mean held her in the hospital and cried, Not the loud, broken cry of sorrow, but the kind that comes when joy squeezes your heart so tight it has no choice but to leak through your eyes. Holding Kaima, he whispered, "You'll never have to raise yourself." And in that sentence was the entire weight of his journey. Everything he had given, everything he had lost, and everything he had finally reclaimed. He didn't tell his siblings until a week later. Anita had suggested he wait, not out of malice, but for clarity. Laura called and cried. She said she was happy. Ibuka asked for baby photos. There were no dramatic reunions, no sudden bursts of reconciliation, but there was warmth, and warmth was enough. Over time, they called more, not for help, but for updates. Ibuka had been promoted at the garage. Laura's sewing was now supplying uniforms to 2 secondary schools. They sent photos. They asked about Kaima. They joked. They laughed. And in those moments, Min realized something powerful. Love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it returns like a bird that flew away and now builds a nest on your windowsill, uninvited, but welcome. One Sunday afternoon, Min took Kaima to Iduim. Anita stayed back. She had work to finish. It was just father and daughter. He wanted her to see where he came from, even if she didn't yet understand it. The road was still red and rude, splashing dust like a stubborn child. The house he grew up in was no longer there. It had been sold to a cousin who turned it into a grocery shop. The mango tree was gone. In its place stood a kiosk and 2 broken chairs. Min stood there with Kaima on his shoulders, pointing to empty spaces that once held entire chapters of his life. "That's where we used to fetch water," he said. She blinked, unimpressed, more interested in a passing goat. He chuckled. On their way back to the bus park, he stopped by the stream where he used to cry as a boy. He sat Kaima down, cupped water in his hands, and whispered, "The boy who used to kneel here is gone." But he didn't die. He rose. The sun dipped slowly behind the trees, casting long shadows that didn't scare him anymore. As they boarded the bus, Kaima rested her head on his chest. Min closed his eyes, his heart quiet, his past finally silent. Not forgotten, but forgiven. And as the bus rumbled toward Bariku, he smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because, for the first time, everything was finally whole. Sometimes the heaviest burden you will ever carry is not failure. It's love unchecked, stretched too thin, and mistaken for obligation. Like me, many of us are pouring from cups already cracked, feeding mouths that no longer say thank you, and forgetting that saving everyone else shouldn't cost you. If this story reminded you of anything, let it be this: sacrifice is noble, but self-neglect is not. There comes a time in life when choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival, it's wisdom. And sometimes the most merciful thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their comfort and complacency. Boundaries don't break relationships, entitlement does. You are not wicked because you stopped answering every call. You are not a bad sibling because you started planning for your future. You're just growing, and growth has its own kind of noise. Look around your life. Who are you carrying that should be walking? Who are you feeding while you starve silently? And most importantly, when will you start writing your own name in the pages of your plans? As the Bible says in Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1, to everything there is a season and a time to every purpose under the heaven. Maybe your season of bleeding for others has ended. Maybe it's time to heal, to rise, and to live not just out of duty, but out of purpose. We thank you for every listener whose heart connected with this story, for the ones tired of carrying their families on their shoulders, for the ones who feel forgotten while giving everything they have. Lord, remind them today that they too matter, that their dreams are not a luxury, but a calling, that choosing themselves is not rebellion, it is divine wisdom. May you bless those who have given without applause. Strengthen those who have kept going, even when no one asked how they were. Teach them, Lord, that setting boundaries is not a sin, but a strategy. Surround them with people who refill what's been poured out. Let peace find them where pain once lived. Let provision meet them where pressure tried to bury them. For every tired brother, every weary sister, every silent breadwinner, may their season of dry ground end. May you cause new rivers to spring up in the desert of their waiting. Give them rest, not just sleep. Give them joy, not just relief. Let them build a life where they're not just useful, but fulfilled. And when they finally look in the mirror, may they see not the burdened child they once were, but the healed, whole, and rising version you've always seen. In the name of Jesus. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.